Buses, trains, and trams are great, and great for the planet for a lot of reasons. They make our lives more dynamic, make it easier to get around our cities, and make sure we have cleaner air. But as part of the passion to electrify everything, some people are forgetting what makes transit good for the environment in the first place. In fact, you might even argue that a newfound obsession with electrification is hurting the environment because it's making transit less effective. How's that possible? Well, let's talk about it. Welcome to RM Transit, a channel where we talk about making public transit successful to save the planet. Consider supporting the channel on Patreon so I can bring you more videos. When I'm sitting on the roadside in any number of cities, I usually want the bus to come as soon as possible, and I don't usually care much if it's electric. And yet, there's a big push in a lot of countries to electrify all of the buses, often from people who seem to think that transit has an environmental or image problem, or who just feel like they can hijack things. Funds are available, and while the transit agency, silly, might want nice new stops or a new bus maintenance facility, what it really needs are electric buses, right? Transit is being pushed to electrify very widely, and to be clear, electrification is nice. Electric vehicles tend to be more reliable since they have less moving parts, and they're almost always quieter. And in some applications like urban rail, electrification is basically a requirement. If you want your train to fit lots of people, be nimble, and be light, you can't be carrying around a power plant with you. But a lot of the interest is in battery stuff, which is still young and doesn't have a lot of the benefits of traditional electrification. To be clear, it's great if we have better batteries that let us electrify everything from leaf blowers to fire trucks. But batteries for the foreseeable future are going to be worse than good old poles and wires. And that's because a battery must store energy and then dispense it, with the inherent inefficiencies in that, and batteries degrade over time. Regular old electrification for trams, buses, and trains hooks their electric motors directly into the grid, meaning that electrons are flowing straight from your local dam or nuclear power plant into your transit vehicle to push it along. While it's neat that we can do things these days like build trams that don't need overhead wires, we do need to build overhead wires, and so I'm not sure that we should stop building them and lose the expertise we have in constructing such critical infrastructure. The world has a limited supply of batteries, and probably will for a long time, and that makes me wonder if trams, literal rail vehicles that we know very well how to electrify by traditional means, are the place to be sending those batteries. And the problem with the sudden obsession with battery electric transit vehicles can be seen from a completely different angle. Suddenly, a lot of American commuter rail agencies seem interested in electric trains. Battery electric. Unfortunately, they seem more interested in those battery trains than they are in good service levels. Electric trains are a great outcome if they're the outcome of wanting ever higher levels of service, efficiency, and speed. But if it's just because of a desire for top transit agency brass to pat themselves on the back and say, "We electrified it," then it's not good. Because we might well get battery trains that are more expensive than diesel trains and less functional than regular old electric trains. As a certain penguin man on Twitter pointed out, battery electric trains can be a pretty good solution for North American commuter rail, where 5 trains run in the morning and 5 trains run out of the city in the evening. The problem is that this is a terrible way to run a transit system. Trying to make transit electric before we make it good is putting the cart before the horse. And it's not just that. Caltrain in the San Francisco Bay Area has just launched its new electric service, which is great. It's faster than before and with lovely new trains. And they did it with overhead wires, something which California seems incredibly hesitant to do in other places. But what, you might ask, about its old diesel locomotives? Well, surprisingly, the agency is actually required to render its existing diesel locomotives unusable before selling them to whoever wants to buy a non-functioning diesel locomotive, probably a rail fan. And ultimately, I can't help but see this as being part of the same line of thinking that suggests that transit agencies have a huge environmental problem that means that they need to immediately electrify their dirty diesel buses. A line of thinking that totally discounts the actual environmental benefits of transit and how we get to them. People riding a bus or even a diesel train emit far less pollution on a per-person basis, and a per-vehicle basis, than people in 40 cars, or 400 cars for that matter. It is the people getting together in a common steel vehicle that saves all of the energy and reduces emissions. The electrification is nice, but it's a small factor when compared to the communal element of public transit. Bus or even diesel rail emissions are always going to be negligible in places where a lot of people are driving cars, typically powered by fossil fuels. And I hate to say it, but even in Europe and Asia, a lot of people are still driving regular old cars. And the reality that transit is good for the environment even before it's electrified comes down to more than just the journeys it provides. Transit allows for efficient land use and higher densities, and people living at density and in efficiently planned cities tend to be able to make a lot of their trips without any vehicle at all, just walking on foot or maybe using a bike. Electric vehicles do have benefits, don't get me wrong, but if your goal is to reduce emissions, then you're going to do far better, unless you have a truly excellent bus system, by just running more service and buying more buses, not electrifying the buses you already have. Counterintuitive as it is, if you want your city's overall emissions to go down, more diesel buses is probably going to have a bigger impact than fewer electric ones. And while that might not be obvious to a layman, the politicians that push these electrification schemes should be aware of it. It makes it pretty clear where politicians' priorities lie when they're willing to show up to an event to unveil a fancy new electric bus, but they won't fund basic service so that getting around on transit doesn't suck. Now, I'm not opposed to electric buses. Trolley buses work well enough, and you can get a lot of the flexibility of a battery electric bus with a lot less of the risk if you just do a trolley battery hybrid that charges on the wires and can do branch service off-wire. But it's pretty clear that battery-only buses just aren't mature. With batteries getting so much better year over year thanks to the massive growing electric vehicle industry, why would we commit to buses with the batteries of today for the next 10 plus years when we know that the buses in 2 or 3 years are going to have far more range and better performance? Unlike with battery electric cars that still spend most of their time parked, the duty cycle for transit vehicles is very hard. They spend a lot of time in motion and they're going to be charged and decharged a lot of times. Now, I've no doubt that we'll get there at some point, and battery electric buses will just be the default for any place that doesn't have trolley wires. But right now, this is just a very poor use of resources. It doesn't maximize people getting on good transit, which is the ultimate goal of all of this. Of course, zero emissions transit for the sake of the zero emissions is something that the most advanced transit systems in the world can focus on, places like Switzerland and Japan. But for most cities and countries for that matter, what powers the transit doesn't really matter. Transit is always going to be the most efficient and best for the planet form of fast mobility, and that's because efficiency is inherent in its communal nature. Thanks for watching.